I'm Al Filreis, and this is PoemTalk at the Writer's House, where I have the pleasure of convening friends in the world of poetry to collaborate on a close but not too close reading of some poems. We'll talk, maybe even disagree a bit, and perhaps open up the verse to a few new possibilities, and we hope gain for poetry and a poet who interests us some new readers and listeners. And I say listeners because PoemTalk poems are available in recordings made by the poets themselves as part of our Pen Sound archive, writing.upenn.edu/pensound. Well, PoemTalk has once again gone on the road. We've hitched a long ride with the ModPo team and are in Scotland for a week. And today, with great pleasure, we're gathered with friends at the fabulous Fruitmarket Art Centre here in Edinburgh. With thanks to Iain Morrison, who helped us coordinate and host this event, and also Iain's colleague, Ali, and I'm sure Benoit as well, had something to do with it. Thanks to you all and to the Fruitmarket people. And before I introduce today's Poem Talkers, I'm going to invite all those who've joined us here in the room, again, to register their happy presence by making some noise with their hands and voices. Our recording equipment sort of hears you and sort of doesn't hear you, but I think that you could be even louder than that in praising yourselves and us. Come on. Thank you. So good of you all for being here. And yes, you've come to see me converse with Laynie Brown, my colleague at the Kelly Writers House at Penn in Philadelphia and coordinator of ModPo, teacher, editor, poet, dear friend of many poets, whose many recent books include, to name only just a few, the translation of Lily's Back into Lists, a new book that is fabulous. I hope you brought a big stack with you so you could give them away. The Poet's Novel as a Form of Defiance, and Intaglio Daughters. And with Anthony Capildeo, the Trinidadian Scottish writer of poetry and nonfiction, author of many books, including Like a Tree Walking and The Dusty Angel, among others, and whose interests include plurilingualism, traditional masquerade, and multidisciplinary collaboration. And with Laynie Brown, poet based in New York City and North Carolina, editor and publisher with Tender Buttons Press, which she founded, super convener and recent celebrator of Big Birthday, convener of many, many poetic collaborations and communities, author of many books, including In the Laurel Caught, The Sleep That Changed Everything, Crowns of Charlotte, to name a few, and with the happily aforementioned Iain Morrison, poet, musician, performance artist, whose work here at Fruitmarket Gallery, who works here at Fruitmarket Gallery, where he is responsible for cross-art form events and has commissioned poets to write responses to the exhibitions, who's performed everywhere in the UK, from Orkney to Manchester. You could, not any further south than that. I don't know what kind of range that is. Whose performance includes what, Anthony?
Only the best places.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Only the best places. Whose performance work includes, among many other things, I hear a durational installation in which he read aloud every Emily Dickinson poem. Wow, I wrote that down. Could that possibly be 1,700?
Yeah. It took a week. I did sleep in between, sessions, but yeah.
That is cool. Can you come over to the States to do that?
I absolutely can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very happily.
Can someone make a note of that? Holy cow. Well, look, thank you, Iain. Thank you for all of this. We've been in touch for years, and we're just meeting, and I feel like we're siblings or something.
Oh, well, and I'm so happy that ModPo's come over. It was one of those sort of dream things. And hearing you doing the intro just now, I thought the number of times I've heard that lovely kind of
in your head
cadence, and then suddenly I'm seeing your mouth moving next to me, and it's happening live. So
that's so sweet.
Yeah,
you're great. And thank you all, Anthony. Thank you for, I wouldn't say last minute, but you're kind of diving in, and we appreciate that.
Oh, I think it's very suitable. J'ai été plongée.
And Leanne, my pal, thank you. where you're not all talked out so far, and we're only, 3/4 of the way through our visit?
Well, it's one of my favorite poets ever. So.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And Laynie, as always, and I also want to just thank you again here for all the curating you've done of everything, every aspect of this trip. Well, today, the five of us have gathered here to talk about two poems by the late, just referenced Scottish poet, Veronica Forrest-Thomson. And these poems can be found in collected poems and translations published in 1990. The poems we're going to discuss are S/Z, and Lemon and Rosemary. And I want to acknowledge the efforts of Laynie, who chose the poems, curating this episode. The audio we'll listen to is from a recording made at the huge Cambridge Poetry Festival in April 1975. And we note that her performance here preceded her death by just a few weeks. If you are following the reading of Lemon and Rosemary along with the final published text, you'll notice that there are some significant differences between that and the version Veronica read at the festival, which is to say, the poem you're about to hear was still in process. I assume that's what was going on there. For permission to play the remarkable recordings, I think, recordings of these poems from the collection of the British Library Sound Archive, we want to thank Dr. Gareth Farmer, who couldn't be here today, but is very much appreciated, and the poet's estate as well. We thank this estate as well. So now, let's all listen to this rare recording of Veronica Forrest-Thomson performing S/Z and Lemon and Rosemary.
Now, I hope you'll bear with me while I read one which is partly in French, but I have translated the French. It's called S/Z, which is the title of a very well-known book by Roland Barthes. J'étais plongée dans une de ces rêveries profondes qui saisit tout le monde, même un homme frivole, au sein des fêtes les plus tumultueuses. Aux fêtes tumultueuses, rêveries profondes. I was sunk in one of those profound daydreams which grab everyone, even a trivial man, in the middle of the most violent parties. At violent parties, profound daydreams. That is one of the rules Balzac uses and Barthes notices. There are many other rules, but I don't want to mention them. We can, some of us, sometimes forget the whole problem. I mean the only problem, what is true. I write no question mark after that question. There are a few answers, such as literature matters. What else is there? What am I going to do with my life? Write another book, I suppose. What else is there? I expect no answer. Poems teach one that much, to expect no answer. But keep on asking questions. That is important. Just hope the house doesn't fall down, for I have no insurance. Je suis plongée dans une de ces rêveries profondes qui saisit tout le monde, même une femme frivole, au sein des fêtes tumultueuses. It's called, with a backwards glance at garlic and sapphires, Lemon and Rosemary, and it's for Catherine Cullen. Though my deserted frying pans lie around me, I do not want to make it cohere. Nobody, I myself, shooting live subjects in pictures sung with imagination and rung with truth. Dean knew it was blackmail. Hung up to dry for fishing lines on the side of the grey wharf of Lethe. Is this a chisel that I see before me? If so, I want to hack my name on the bedroom door. A star shines on the hour of our meeting, Lucifer, son of the morning, and thanks for your lighter, I have forgotten the matches. Oh, why do I hate doctors so? There was a time, some years ago, but do dial 1000. On the best battlefields, no dead bodies.
Iain Morrison, pick one of the poems. Doesn't matter which, and even if you said SC, we're probably still likely to talk about the other poem, because that's the way we run.
I feel like where I want to start is to think about framing, and the way that in Veronica Forrest-Thomson, I'm sure we're going to talk about the intertextualities with other poets and the sort of elusive search for truth. It's exciting that truth comes up in Lemon and Rosemary. And I feel like reading her poems, I have the experience of being in a hall of mirrors that she carefully constructs. You know, you start in SC with SC, I said SC, SZ, I'm British. with the quote from Balzac and then end with it. And then, you know, what's at the center? You know, I'm interested in, do we ever get to a central point with her poems where we're on firm ground?
Cool. So you started with a meta comment. That's great.
Yeah, was that all right to start a meta?
All right, of course it is. All right, Leanne, what in what Iain said about framing leads you to your next thought?
Well, the framing of the Balzac French in the front and the back, and I didn't even know it was Balzac when I first read it. Like, it frames the poem in SZ, the first stanza and the last are the same exact stanza, so it frames it. But I love how she translated it into English in the third stanza, so you know about the profound daydreams and the violent parties, and it's very sexual.
What's a violent party?
It's a sexual party that there's a charge, doesn't mean an orgy, but it means like there's things happening in extremis.
And why is that the environment, particularly for daydreams?
I've pictured a poet as going into a reverie in the corner and observing and
Separated
going
from
inside,
the
and writing the poem in the middle of the party. That's what I just feel. But yeah.
Anthony, thoughts about the party or really anything else?
Well, one of the things I was thinking is, this is anecdotal and very gossipy, but as I'm not really a scholar of Veronica Forrest-Thomson, and I won't give any names.
But did you just say gossipy?
I did say gossipy.
Oh, I'm excited.
Then one of the parties I heard about but didn't attend in Cambridge ended with someone taking all their clothes off, reciting things, falling asleep and waking up with a sharp axe that had been placed upon them to keep them warm.
Wow.
So I suggest that is what a violent party might mean.
What about the one where somebody
So
burned all
actual
the furniture?
violence.
Actual violence. Well, I don't know. Is a sleeping axe violence or just potential violence? Sorry.
No, sorry is not the word. I'm intrigued. Laynie, how intrigued are you about this violent party? Have you been to a no, never mind.
Don't ask me that question now. Well, I'm really interested in this line that I was sunk in one of those profound daydreams, and that relationship to the most violent party, like the question of, oh, what will I do with my life? What is there? And then there's the writing and there's the violent party, and they seem to be somehow synonymous.
Writing. Yeah. I'm going to throw Iain a little meta-poetic reference here and see if you want to do anything with it. Laynie just referred to the writing. In Lemon and Rosemary, which is a poem that affects me terribly, it's an extraordinary poem, and I don't know if I should be elated or depressed by reading it, but is this, and I take this to be the pen that Veronica's using to write this, if this is a chisel, as in a sculptor of a poem, right? Is this a chisel that I see before me? If so, I want to, speaking of axes, I want to hack my name on the bedroom door. It could you're not going there, but
No,
my metatextual reference. What does that have to do with writing then? And what's happening with the bedroom door?
Okay, what you made me remember is one of the things that I think I often find when I read Veronica Forrest-Thomson's poems is that quite often I see a phrase and like, that could be a metaphor for what it is to write poetry.
Right, often.
Often, because equally, shooting live subjects and pictures sung with imagination and rung with truth could be another way of thinking about what it is to write a poem. So I absolutely do see that there, but at the same time, I feel that she undercuts any violence in it with the kind of what I read as a campy reference to Macbeth as well, you know, the dagger, and of course the dagger...
Spell that out a bit.
Is this a dagger that I see before me? Is Lady Macbeth hallucinating? Is it? Or I can't remember who it is. Maybe it's Macbeth. It's Macbeth, isn't it? Yeah, it's Macbeth himself. And that comes up in one of our other poems, I think, Conversation on a Benin Head. So like, you know, for me, this kind of like sort of art dipping in and out of other writers' catchy phrases.
Before I turn to Leanne to respond to that, would you add another reference to another writer or writing?
In this poem?
In either.
Well, in this one, it's worth pulling out, because it's not spelled out in the poem, but in her introduction that we heard on the audio, and you might not have heard it so well, she says, lemon and rosemary with a backward glance to garlic and sapphires, which is from T.S. Eliot from Burnt Norton. And looking at that for context, I'm trying to remember the passage. It's kind of, there's a lot about what persists of the human, and I don't know if, the battlefields, I feel it resonates with that.
A clear reference there. Thank you. That's great. And when I see, but do dial 10000, I'm hearing that Shakespearean rag. So she's really layering
You're
the
hearing
textual. Eliot, that Shakespearean rag, so elegant, so intelligent. Leanne, what are your thoughts?
Well, I read those O's as erotic, orgasm.
That too.
Yeah. But then the chisel and wanting to hack your name on a bedroom door, she is saying, I was in that bedroom with you. Nobody else knows. I'm going to put my name. I was there with you, Lucifer, son of the morning. A star shines on the hour of our meeting.
Is this a breakup poem?
It's a revealing secret gossipy poem, But I was with this person that night, and nobody knows, and I'm going to put it in my poem.
Anthony, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I was thinking violent things as usual this morning. So, lemon rosemary, I wasn't really thinking about garlic and sapphire, though it's there. I was thinking about cooking with the deserted frying pans, but also about Shakespeare's time. And obviously, the first line, nobody, I myself, is a reference to Desdemona and Othello, but Othello was a great military leader in battles at sea, and lemon makes me think of what you would use to not have scurvy, so to not perish or become ill on long sea voyages, but rosemary is for remembrance. But this also means that somebody or something's being cooked, and I'm thinking about the potential edibility of the lover or beloved in a slightly Margaret Atwood or maybe Monique Wittig way. So,
Cool.
with the do dial 10000, that stanza as well, I heard in Sylvia Plath's voice, and the rhythms of Lady Lazarus or Daddy, and or Why Do I Hate Doctors So? There was a time some years ago. And so this for me is definitely a murdering the beloved poem.
By the minute, Anthony, I'm happier and happier with our decision to include you in this conversation. It's extraordinary. And Laynie, we're getting to the point where the intertextuality, which is part of the lyricism, it is not, there are no footnotes, it's not crammed in. It really seems very natural to the voice. So what should we do with it? We haven't mentioned the Balzac or Barthes. So where do we go with this intertextuality?
I just want to add
By the way, sorry to add this other question, and you can ignore it, but if we were to bring this into a classroom, let's say an introduction to poetry classroom, where Veronica's poems absolutely belong because they're so great, wouldn't our students roll their eyes and say, oh, you know too much poetry, and why are you hauling all this in for us?
Well,
you can ignore that part.
First, I want to just add something more about Lucifer and murder, because it's irresistible. How far is a writer willing to go to have this life? Is it murder? Is it Lucifer? What are the costs? What are the costs? So you want me to talk about?
No, I don't. I'm not demanding that by any means. But I guess the question more generally was, where are we now in this conversation about intertextuality? It's presumably very vital to the poem, the way we're experiencing it.
Okay, well, here's how I want to respond. With a quote from Barthes, from SZ. There may be nothing to say about writerly texts. First of all, where can we find them? Certainly not in reading, or at least very rarely, by accident, fleetingly, obliquely, in certain limit works. The writerly text is not a thing. To rewrite the writerly text would consist only in disseminating it, in dispersing it within the field of infinite difference. The writerly text is a perpetual present. So this is in the background of what Veronica Forrest-Thomson is proposing. In other words, there isn't anything else except language and mixing and appropriation and collage, and everything is in the field already. So if somebody says, I wrote this original poem and there's nothing overlaid and there's nothing taken, that's not actually true. It just may be less visible.
I'm going to ask all four of you 2 questions, and in turn, I hope you'll answer them or avoid them, but in avoiding them, respond. The first question is, I'm thinking of SC, what is the whole problem? We can, some of us sometimes, forget the whole problem. Now, she says what it is, which is what is true, but so the first question is, what does this poem mean by the whole problem? And second, there are a few answers, such as literature matters. I took that to be unironic, literature matters, but my question to you is, does this poem unironically suggest that literature matters, and if so, why? Iain, you're kind of first, because you're closest to me, so do you want to take either of those?
Yeah, I feel like what I want to do is couch your questions in a bigger difficulty that she's having. So the context for this, as you said, is Cambridge Literature Festival. If you listen to the recording as well and you can hear the audience, and I encourage people to do this at home, I think one of the things that she's doing is taming the men in the audience in a way, because I think there's a certain sense of her as a self-assured, or having to keep up this element of self-assuredness, line tamer. And one of the answers to me of why there's all these references, Al, is that in order to gain currency in this highly competitive intellectual environment, in a very male-dominated environment, she has to show her learning. She has to overperform and make sure that the audience knows that any weaknesses in her, she's already anticipated, and she has a rebuttal ready. And I think
not just the poetic environment, the poetry community environment, but literary theory and literary criticism, academic.
Yes, absolutely. So she's doing battle. And when we talked earlier about the framing, the French at the beginning and end, the one big shift is the introduction of the feminine. So at the start, well, also the tense, it's j'étais plongé, I was plunged, which is straight from the Balzac. At the end, it's je suis plongé, I am plunged in the present moment of reading the poem. And there's an extra E on the end to make it feminine, so suddenly that becomes feminized.
Wow. Anthony, what your thoughts on these questions?
Well, I would like to pick up a little bit from what Iain's saying, and before that, though, I'd like to step back to the O in the previous poem, and I think a little bit about, or rather just mention, Jahan Ramazani's work on transnational poetics, and whether that O is both the wooden O of a battlefield as in Henry V, or also kind of planetary O, whereby the poem is an area of confluences that is non-appropriative but hybridizing. And as I grew up speaking French as well as English, interested, nobody actually says SZ. We've got SZ, SZ, nobody says zeta. So there's already a kind of silenced language in here. And what interests me is there's also a missing bosom, because, sorry, Jane, why are you looking at me like that?
I'm impressed, I'm just so impressed.
Oh yes, there's a missing bosom. And so if you look at au sein des fêtes les plus tumultueuses, literally that'll be at the heart of, but sein is a word that can also be used for the physical bosom of a person. And of course, if you go back to the Balzac story, which is behind the Barthes text, it hinges on the impossible lust for an androgynous creature. And when this androgynous singer is described, the coy ruffles of lace hiding the bright and delicate bosom is one of the details we're given. So I would suggest that maybe part of the whole problem is language as being like that sort of lace over the potentially speaking body that is both lusted after and hated in gendered performance contexts. Sorry.
Great. Don't apologize. Fantastic.
No, I think I might have forgotten to breathe.
Leanne Brown, where do we go?
Well, I just see a lot of Stein in here. When you read Literature Matters, I heard that echo of history teaches.
Let me recite what history teaches.
History teaches. That repetition and the way
at the end of the portrait of Picasso.
Oh yeah, is it? Yeah. Yes. And the way that she uses very self-consciously she says, I write no question mark after that question. There are a few answers, such as, literature matters, what else is there, period. So she uses no question marks in several places, and that's what Stein said, that you don't need question marks. If you write your sentence well enough, you know it's a question. So there's definitely a lot of Stein in here. And the other thing is that the Balzac-Barthes juxtaposition, it just reminds me of the range of the registers of language she uses. I mean, that's to me what thrilled me when I first encountered this work. Is she says very personal, off the cuff kind of language, that, and then she has like this very theoretical references, high theory, party conversation, astrology. There's these great poems that the Libra, all these astrology references, and I was like putting that all together was just like wow, and that's it's here.
Laynie is registering that she is not surprised that you brought astrology in, because that's what you do, but it's there. Laynie, the next line shifts from the Stein, which is definitely there, I think, to Leanne, to something more Plathian that is so Plathian it may actually need some depth, further depth. Apologies, I didn't mean that really what I just said, but the register, the demotic line, what am I going to do with my life? All right, write another book, I suppose. What else is there? What do you make of that shift?
Well, I wanted to speak about poems teach us that much to expect no answer. And so it's a problem. The answer is indeterminacy. And the problem is that it's very difficult. And it's akin to violence. It's akin to, bodies on the battlefield and murder in the kitchen. It's the house falling down. It's life or death. That's the problem. I also link it to her importance to language poetry, which is kind of where I first encountered her work as a very young poet in New York in the scene. And Lynn
You're saying
Hygenians,
that among the language people who were in New York at that time, Veronica was on their lips.
Veronica is super important. I'm thinking of Lynn's resistance of closure, Lynn Hygenian's resistance of closure.
I think it's called
Sorry
to correct you. I'm really
thank
not usually
you.
like
no,
this.
No, I
resistance
appreciate it.
to closure.
Yeah, resistance to
rejection of closure.
Rejection of closure.
Let's
now,
get it.
I got corrected. Sorry.
Thank you.
Jeez,
Rejection
what a
of closure in relation to this acceptance that we're not going to get a resolution, but still deciding to live in that space of poetry is not a question or an answer, but it's challenging. It's life or death.
Iain, I mean for this next round to be a chance for everybody here to say whatever is on their minds at this point, but I'm going to pretend like I'm directing things by asking you a question about one line in Lemon and Rosemary. I found powerful in a sort of emotional way the line, "Oh, why do I hate doctors so?" Do you want to do anything with that and then just say whatever you're thinking?
Yeah,
or ignore it if you like.
I mean, maybe just to note that that's one of the things that I enjoy in her work is this kind of jaunty rhyming thing that comes in quite a lot that I think sort of fits with the archness. So I'm not sure I have anything to say about the Doctor per se, but that's there for me. You get it in the one about her horse as well. She enjoys the kind of the bounciness of sound in poems, which I think is important to recognise in a proto-language poet, perhaps. The things that are in my head that haven't really come up, maybe the SZ, just to kind of further intensify the gender thing about it. It's, that's S is the initial of the male character in the Balzac, and Z is the androgynous character.
Yeah.
So from the start, you basically have male versus ostensibly female, but then complicated there. And the other thing about the Bart framing, which I feel is picked up in the kind of everything from like nobody, I, myself to, I expect no answer, is that there's this, the predominant idea, which others will talk about better than I will in Bart, that the reader completes the poem. So the idea that, the poem, and this resonates with her major critical work, Poetic Artifice, that, what we bring to the poem, what is that? Our own resources, how do we, to use her word, naturalize a reading? How do we arrive at reading using the resources that we bring to the poem and that being valid?
Anthony?
I want to agree with everything Iain says. It always makes me happy to do that.
Me too, what a relief.
He's blushing.
So am I. Well, what I'd like to talk about really is what was interesting to me in hearing Veronica Forrest-Thomson herself speak the lines. Is I'm going to be very rude now and say that maybe, oh, why do I hate the doctors? So it doesn't just refer to the medical doctors, like the ones who despise class, but also doctors of philosophy and academic doctors.
Hear, hear.
Particularly as she was at Girton College, where I also had a research fellowship. And when you go to Girton, one of the most remarkable things is the portraits of terrifying-looking women, wonderfully terrifying-looking women, all down the corridors and in the halls, who founded the college, rather than, or laid the path for people considered female to become recognized as doctors, as learned. But what I'd really like to say after that, in terms of the speaking voice, is one, I had been expecting, although she's quoting Balzac, which is prose, I had been expecting her to read it as poetry, because in French, if you're reciting poetry, you sound the E, which is normally silent. See, rather than saying au sein des fêtes les plus tumultueuses, you'd say au sein des fêtes les plus tumultueuses, which changes the count in the line. And so it was very striking to me that she insists on a prosaic performance in terms of the French, rather than sounding it as poetry, even though she's lineated it.
It would be an Alexandrine, wouldn't it?
It would.
But
And then the other thing I noticed is the what am I going to do with my life? It's a sort of decadent voice, and just thinking of Eliot being like Dickens and sort of doing all the voices, that she changes her voice. So even though she's an embodied speaker, the I speaking any of these lines is obviously a persona, and she uses almost throwaway and self-interrupting voices. It's much, much more dramatic than people who shan't be named, who read the incredible theory.
Leanne?
Wow, okay. Well, I don't want to pass this opportunity to just say two tangential texts that I associate. Of course, Artifice of Absorption by Charles Bernstein, which talks about her poetic artifice work, the theory work. And also when Laynie and I were talking about, we haven't read the Barth lately, we need to do that, and how poetry does the work, the theory work, in a very condensed way, and does more too. It can do all this, this academic work that can take hundreds of pages and a thesis, and you can get it in one page. And sometimes it can be, seen as throwaway or light, but it's not. It's condensed, it's all there, and it can radiate out. And the other book I start to associate with this is Fred Moten's book, B. Jenkins, where he talks about writers he knew only through his mother. And it's got Bart and it jumps to who was the other person on that same page? Every page is this wild jump to very multiplicitous references, I think it's a Monk or something, or Coltrane, It's just this huge range of web of references. That's what I feel like this work does, shoots the web around,
It puts me in mind, I'm turning to Laynie next, but it puts me in mind of a number of people who I particularly admire, who have figured out the combination of verse, let's just call it that, poetry, and theory, and critical theory, the way they need to and the way they want to. Fred is a great example of that. And there are many. And, had Veronica Forrest-Thomson stayed with it, longer, had she continued to work, I think we would be talking about her not simply in the language context in the United States, but in the context that someone like Fred makes. And I think that's a really important consideration. Laynie, where do you want to go with this?
I want to go to the line in Lemon and Rosemary, I do not want to make it cohere. I just love that line and the it that could be the poem or the life as a writer, or trying to integrate all these sources in a way that is, immediately understandable, because nothing is understandable either immediately or or over a life. And it seems like it's a very strong statement of poetics. It's a refusal to say, I'm gonna do all the work so that you can just receive this text and know exactly how to read it.
It's a devastating, almost near quotation from Ezra Pound's Cantos at the end, when he realizes that what might be called volcanic historiography, the pressured mixing of history and registers, which was clearly a failed project in his case, he admitted it, becomes the question that one must ask about an overall project. Whether that gets ironized a lot or not is up for discussion. Leanne?
No, I just think, I heard Yeats, like the cinder will not hold, like the...
Yeah. But Pound actually asked that question in one of the late cantos. So what I'd love for us to do is one more round before we get to be sort of our final thoughts. Before we get to something I forgot to remind you about or tell you about that you remembered last night at the pub. At the end of every poem talk, we make a recommendation. We call it Gathering Paradise. So something you're reading or a poet or artist that you want to recommend. I'll just plant that seed. Meantime, what I'd like for all four of you to do, if you will, is to say something to address the question that people coming new to these poems, to Veronica Forrest-Thomson, might want to know from thoughtful people who've read her work, which is, why should one read Veronica Forrest-Thomson? How does it matter? What is a great way of introducing this work to people who don't know? I'm not asking for a simple comment, but I am asking for a general, I guess, recommendation. What is a way in? So, Iain, do you want to try that first?
Yeah, I feel like I'm maybe going to avoid the question slightly, because something that I really want to say that I've realized that I haven't said is, and maybe this is partly answering your question, that it's not super serious. You know, like, she can seem like a really academic poet because she's enjoying her references, but her references do both high and low. And one of the things that I see in Lemon and Rosemary, and I amuse myself by thinking about this, I have no idea if she was intending this, but when I was thinking about the Dean in the third line, Dean knew it was blackmail, I was thinking, well, of course, like, there's the Dean like the Doctor, you know, in the academic environment of Cambridge, but also I was like, which Deans would be around? I was like, maybe it's James Dean, you know, like shooting live subjects in pictures. It could be James Dean, you know, some with imagination. And also, I was thinking, who else was writing at the time? I was thinking, well, Kerouac's on the road, Dean Moriarty, you know, it's Beat Week for you guys. You know, like, that wasn't his real name, that was Neil Cassidy, you know, like, even there's these sort of references, halls of mirrors, and for me, like, the fun that she has with getting at this essential question of what's authentic and what's true, what's inauthentic, you know, what's not true, it's all couched in looking at the whole world. I mean, there's Tolkien in here too, A Star Shines in the Hour of Our Meeting. I was like, is that from Paradise Lost? And I was like, no, it's Tolkien, it's the elves speaking. So she's playful, she's playful.
So now, a quick recommendation. Why should people read this work?
Because I think it's been missed out. I think it's only now that people, I think certainly in British reading circles, are really getting to see that it stands up to the quality of her reputation as a thinker. One of the things that I heard a lot when I first heard about her poems was people saying things like, oh, she's a great theorist, but the poems don't really do the theory justice. I don't know if anyone else has heard that. So it kind of, I was almost like put off reading her for a long time by sort of older voices saying that, because I think they couldn't see how ahead of the game she was.
So they were wrong because they shouldn't have been telling you that, right?
They shouldn't have been telling me that.
Because they knew you were a poet.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a finger wagging, wasn't
yeah,
it?
because I think she does things that they didn't want poetry to go in that direction. Maybe they didn't want it to be so frivolous and enjoy itself so much, perhaps, something like that.
Thank you. Anthony?
I won't spend the rest of the day just saying frivolous.
The way Iain said, would you do it again?
Frivolous.
Yeah.
We'll have less of your frivolousness, Anthony.
So what I would really like to say is that these are clearly poems that come out of a lot of dialogues and conversations. One of the things about Cambridge, which is both bad and good, or about poetry circles, is that people do sit down close together and discuss things intensely. And I think that a way into these poems would be definitely to share them with people and to realize that different people have different stumbling blocks. And what is very, very important is that they are a slant way in to what is now becoming an historical scene of the mythical origins of the Cambridge School. It's a slant way in, and I think it's very important to read alongside people like Denise Riley, who've survived and evolved, and shone light that continue to be slant.
Lovely, thank you for that. Leanne?
Yeah, I just would say if you have any interest in like French feminist theory or theory at all, and in poetry, this is work to look at how that manifests, and to take that up also as your own love, to figure out how to put all those things together in your work.
Laynie?
I'll just add that even though we have all this elaborate framing and so many constellations of texts we can read to deeper understand, I still feel that a way in is to just read exactly what's here first and experience really an unmistakable voice in poetry that, when I first came to it, I hadn't read any of the things, I didn't look it all up immediately, but just to have that experience with the voice that's willing to hang out in the house that might come crashing down and there's no insurance, and just feel that urgency of her work.
Thank you. My final thought / recommendation is very simple and quick, and then we'll turn to our Gathering Paradise. I've come to this again through New York language, San Francisco Bay Area language as well, but I never until now felt the importance of the starting right in the middle of things in media res as I do in this poetry. And I think it's not, and the first line of Lemon and Rosemary is nobody, period, I, comma, myself. Now that, as you heard, that's what's in print here, but you heard a different start, which is significant, I think, because it didn't matter, either it didn't matter or it mattered a great deal to Veronica to start in the middle, but to start with nobody, period. It's as if we're having a conversation, and the first thing is to think about the speaker or the identity of the writer as a nullity that has to get that has to become a presence made of an absence. And of course, I think that now that Veronica Forrest-Thomson is not here, then nobody becomes a nobody, and it becomes really important because the end of that poem is recommending the best battlefields where there are no dead bodies. It's kind of a weird pacifism.
But also it's Emily Dickinson, I'm nobody, who are you?
I'm nobody, who are you, exactly, which is also fabulous in media res. Well, we like to end Poem Talk with a minute or two of Gathering Paradise, which is a chance for us to spread wide our narrow hands. Some people do this as if it's Dickinson gathering in a sort of blessing kind of way, and some people think it's the opening of a book and the paradise is in there. But nonetheless, we call it Gathering Paradise. It's a chance for us to spread wide our narrow hands to gather a little something poetically good or aesthetically good or theoretically good, to hail or commend someone or something going on in the poetry world. Iain Morrison, I know you are ready for this.
I am, and I'm wanting to take this opportunity to gather in the work of another poet who's sadly not with us anymore, Callie Gardner. They were a very important editor as well as a poet, and between 2015 and 2020, they edited a small zine called Zarf, and very generously at the end of that publishing period, they made all of the issues available online, so you can find it on Tumblr. It's the Zarchive, the pun, and there's 15 issues. One of them, issue number 12, talks about their great love of Veronica Forrest-Thomson, and they were the person, I think, who most enthused me about Veronica Forrest-Thomson, who they called the better poet and dedicated their life's work to. So
perfect. Thank you, Iain. Appreciate that. Anthony, gather some paradise, please.
Well, there's a literal gathering which happened a few times over the last year by Alicia Per Mohammed, who's associated with the Scottish BIPOC writers who don't seem to be here today very, very much. And this gathering was of Our Time as a Garden, and she's done a very beautiful publication which you can get free from the University of Edinburgh website, which is a number of poems resulting from workshops and conversations from Edinburgh-based and Scotland-based writers on ideas of time and gardens, including everything, migrations, deep time, underwater gardens, little animals running around, licking stones, whatever you can imagine.
What's the name of it?
Alicia Pir Mohammed is the person to look for. ALYCIAPIRMOHAMED. Our Time as a Garden, the anthology.
Thank you so much for that. Leanne Brown, Gathers in Paradise.
Well, I've just published this amazing young woman poet named Lucia Hinojosa Gasiola from Mexico City, and she's doing this thing that I'm very interested in of going a gathering paradise, but off the page. Like it's totally on the page poem, but it's a score for performance that she sings, and she does visual art. It's a visual poem. It's just like very multiplicitous and synesthetic, and she's it's in Spanish and English, not translated. It's back and forth, and it has that experience we see here of the French and the English, where you can. This is back and forth, but you can. It expands out into this other realms, and she's just exquisite writer in both languages, and just very present and uncannily kind of prescient. It's like it's one of those books you can open bibliomantically and find something, and it sort of speaks to your moment. So it's called the Telaraña Circuit. So Telaraña is like a spider web. So I keep saying the word web today, about weaving a web of language and literature and reference and connection in this very human body, but in our minds and all together. So I recommend her book, The Telaraña Circuit by Lucia Hinojosa Gasiola.
Published by Tender Buttons
By
Press.
Tender Buttons, yeah. I know it's shameless self-promotion. It's my press, but yeah.
It's fine. It's not
Yeah,
self-promotion.
yes.
It's a press.
Not self,
You're
but
doing a community
service,
work.
yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
Laynie Brown.
Well, I'm going to second that recommendation. The book is amazing, and she is amazing. And then I just want to shout out to Anne Boyer, who recently moved to Edinburgh from the States. Check out her work, which has been republished in the UK, a book of poems, Garments Against Women, which is just stunning and brilliant, and then her prose work, The Undying, and all of her work.
Whom we hung out with just the other night, a splendid person. My Gathering Paradise is really to identify 3 people who happen to be here in the room, whose poetry I admire, and who happen to be also part of the many video recordings we're making of conversations about their poems and others. There are other people in the room that I could mention, but these are the 3 I want to call out. First of all, Jane Goldman is here. All fans of Jane want to say something? We had an absolutely extraordinary conversation with Jane at her place the other day. And for those who receive my maybe annoying emails about new videos and things, we will, within a month or less, put out the link to that conversation, which was just stunning. Irene Tora Mohadano, who is here from Spain, who has published, yay, Irene, who has become a friend of ours and mine and Maud Poe's and the Writer's House in Philadelphia, and who has 2 books of poetry. One is in French and a little bit English and a little bit of Spanish. Did I get that combination fairly right? It's a couple of English poems. And then the second is all Spanish, which I actually, though my Spanish is very poor, tried to translate a little bit of. Anyway, wonderful, wonderful poetry. And Irene also hosts a weekly Zoom conversation about very contemporary Spanish language poetry with people who want to do some thinking about contemporary poetry in Spanish. And the third is a person I've just met, but whom I admire, who's going to be joining us tomorrow, and that's Maria Sledmere, who's over there. And stay tuned for, I don't know how many you're going to be able to join us, but we're doing one session about one of your poems. So we're very excited about that. Well, that's all the hating doctors so we have time for on Poem Talk today. There was no laugh there? All right, let's try again. Well, that's all the hacking one's name on the bedroom door we have time for on Poem Talk today. Poem Talk at the Writers' House is a collaboration of the Center for Programs in Contemporary Writing and Penn Sound and ModPo and the Kelly Writers' House at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, PA, USA. Thanks to my guests, Laynie Brown, Anthony Capildeo, Laynie Brown, Iain Morrison, and thanks also to Poem Talk's directors and engineers today, Zach Cardner right over there, and Mr. Audio, Chris Martin, and to Poem Talk's editor, the same amazing Zach Cardner, and thanks again to Iain and all our friends and colleagues here in Scotland who've helped us guide us through this wonderful visit, to consult all 194, now 195, monthly, dating back to 2007, of Poem Talk. Please go to poemtalk.org. We post the audio recording of each episode, of course, but also lots of program notes, photographs, if we remember to take them, of the Poem Talkers. I know you'll take some, Iain. Relevant links to Penn Sound and elsewhere, sometimes a video of the session, which would be happening. In this case, Poem Talk is also available through Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so check us out and subscribe and leave us a review. Next time on Poem Talk, we'll be back at the Writers' House in Philadelphia. We'll be talking to Richard Deming, coming down from Yale, James Berger, and our own Sophia DeRose about two poems by Ron Padgett, The Austrian Maiden, and Joe Brainerd's Painting Bingo. This is Al Filreis, and I hope you'll join us for that or another episode of Poem Talk.